Florida heat clung heavy in the air that afternoon, the kind that makes the pavement shimmer and slows even the quickest step. In a quiet neighborhood outside Orlando, though, something unusual was brewing. 42-year-old Derek Hayes, a man known among his friends as gentle, dependable, and maybe a little too trusting, had just shocked his entire circle with an announcement. He was getting married. And not just married someday, married this weekend. The news landed like a thunderclap. His mother, his best friend Marcus, even his coworkers at the auto shop where he worked, they all had the same reaction. Wait, what? Married? Already? Derek didn't flinch. For months he had carried the quiet ache of loneliness. Divorced 5 years earlier, he had spent too many evenings coming home to an empty apartment, eating dinner from a takeout box in front of the TV. When he met Monique Carter online, a 38-year-old woman with a booming laugh, a soft voice, and a frame that dwarfed his, something in him came alive. Monique wasn't like the others. She didn't judge. She didn't mock his quiet habits or the gray already creeping into his beard. She called him her forever, and he clung to it. Still, Marcus couldn't hide his skepticism. Sitting across from Derek at a diner 2 nights before the wedding, he leaned forward, elbows on the sticky Formica table. Bro, Marcus said, lowering his voice. Are you hearing yourself? You've known her, 6 weeks? Derek stirred his coffee, eyes fixed on the swirl of cream. I know what you're thinking, but it feels different this time. She gets me. You don't see how she looks at me. Marcus shook his head. I see how fast this is moving. You don't know what you're walking into. But Derek just smiled, a dreamy half-smile that made him look younger than his years. I'm tired of waiting, man. Life's too short to second-guess happiness. If anyone had doubts, they grew louder when Monique arrived in town. At nearly 500 pounds, she carried herself with a mixture of pride and defensiveness, as though she knew what everyone whispered behind her back. Strangers stared. Family members exchanged looks. But when she slipped her arm through Derek's at the courthouse, her eyes shining, he seemed immune to the gossip. Love, he insisted, had finally found him. His mother wasn't convinced. After the brief civil ceremony, she pulled him aside in the parking lot. Her hands, small and weathered, clutched at his. Derek, she said softly, I just want you to be careful. This is all so sudden. You barely know her. He squeezed her fingers, forcing a smile. Mama, I know enough. She makes me happy. That's all that matters. But behind that smile, there was already a flicker of unease, something he wouldn't admit out loud. Monique had been pressing him about money, about putting her name on certain papers. He told himself it was normal. Couples share everything, don't they? He pushed the thought down. By evening, the small wedding dinner was underway. No reception hall, no champagne fountain, just takeout fried chicken, potato salad, and a sheet cake picked up at the local grocery store. Derek laughed loudly, louder than he had in years, as Monique fed him a messy bite of cake with her fingers. Yet when he excused himself to the bathroom, Marcus caught the distant look in his friend's eyes. Talk to me, man, Marcus whispered later, away from the crowd. Derek shook his head, almost as if he could shake off the doubts clinging to him. Nothing, just nerves. I'm fine. But he wasn't fine. And within 48 hours, everyone in that room would wish they had listened harder, asked more questions, pressed him not to ignore the warning signs. Because the marriage that began with hurried vows and fried chicken was about to end with flashing police lights and a body bag. The morning of the wedding broke hot and sticky, a Florida sun blazing down on a sky without a single cloud. Derek stood in front of the mirror in his small apartment, tugging nervously at the sleeves of his old Navy suit. It wasn't new, but he hoped no one would notice. His hands trembled just a little, though he kept telling himself it was excitement, not fear. In the next room, Monique's laughter boomed as she finished getting ready. Her wedding dress was custom, flowing white fabric stretched wide to cover her enormous frame, with rhinestones glittering across the bodice. She admired herself in the mirror, adjusting the veil, her expression a mix of pride and determination. She wanted this wedding more than anything. The courthouse lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and paper. Family and friends gathered in rows of metal chairs, fanning themselves with programs. Some leaned close, whispering. Others simply stared. It wasn't just Monique's size that turned heads. It was the whirlwind pace of the relationship. 6 weeks of dating, one quick proposal, and here they were, promising forever before most couples would have even moved in together. The judge entered, flipping through the paperwork without much expression. "Are we ready?" he asked. Derek nodded quickly, though sweat trickled down his temples. He stole a glance at Monique. She was smiling wide, her eyes locked on him with a force that felt both tender and possessive. For a brief moment, his stomach tightened. Was this too fast? He shook the thought away. "Do you, Derek Hayes, take Monique Carter to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice cracked, but he forced the words out. "And do you, Monique Carter, take Derek Hayes to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she said firmly, clutching his hand with a grip that felt unbreakable. A small smattering of applause filled the room, though Marcus stayed quiet in the back, arms folded, jaw tight. He couldn't shake the unease pressing down on him. After the brief ceremony, they spilled into the parking lot where the Florida heat wrapped around them like a heavy blanket. Monique insisted on posing for dozens of pictures, pulling Derek in close, pressing her lips hard against his cheek while he smiled weakly for the camera. It wasn't long before the tone shifted. In the quiet corner of the lot, Monique pressed a stack of papers into Derek's hand. "Baby," she cooed, her eyes fixed on him. "These are just some things to make sure we're covered. Joint accounts, property rights, nothing complicated. It's what married couples do." Derek frowned, glancing at the legal language he barely understood. "Right now? Can't this wait?" Her smile faltered, replaced by a sharp edge. "Why wait? Don't you trust me?" He forced a chuckle, folding the papers under his arm. "Of course I do. Just maybe later. Let's enjoy today." Her eyes narrowed for a split second, but then the smile returned, wide and practiced. "Later, then," she agreed, though her tone carried something unspoken. The reception that followed was small, held in the cramped community room of Derek's apartment complex. Fried chicken buckets sat on folding tables beside potato salad, coleslaw, and cans of soda. A grocery store sheet cake with smeared white icing read in red letters, "Congratulations, Derek and Monique." Laughter echoed, and Derek played the role of the cheerful groom, feeding Monique a messy forkful of cake while the room chuckled. But Marcus caught the look in his friend's eyes again, that same flicker he had seen before, a shadow just behind the smile. Later that evening, as the guests trickled out and the cake sat half-eaten, Marcus pulled Derek aside. "You good?" he asked quietly. Derek hesitated, then nodded too quickly. "Yeah, man. Just tired." Marcus studied him, not convinced. "Listen, if you need an out, any out, you call me. Don't let pride keep you quiet." Derek forced a laugh. "Come on, Marcus. I'm fine. This is the start of something good." But as Monique's voice rang out from across the room, "Baby, come on, help me with these papers." The uneasy knot in Derek's chest grew tighter. No one realized it yet, but that wedding day wasn't a beginning at all. It was the first step toward a countdown neither bride nor groom could stop. Within 48 hours, the vows they exchanged would echo like a cruel joke in the shadow of a tragedy no one saw coming. The newlyweds returned to Derek's modest apartment late that evening, the leftover buckets of fried chicken and the half-melted wedding cake stacked on the counter. The small living room felt suddenly tighter, smaller, as though the walls themselves were leaning in on the couple. Derek tried to set the mood. He lit a single candle on the kitchen table, poured 2 glasses of wine, and placed a hand gently on Monique's shoulder. "Here's to us," he said, forcing brightness into his voice. She raised her glass, clinking it against his, but her smile was strange, more like a claim of victory than the joy of a bride. Dinner that night was quiet at first, but as Derek tried to make conversation, Monique's tone shifted. "So, about those papers," she said, between bites of chicken. Derek sighed. "Monique, we just got married. Can't we put all that aside for one night? Just enjoy each other." Her fork clattered onto the plate. "Enjoy each other? You think I'm not serious about this marriage? You think I don't deserve to be secure?" Derek's jaw tightened. "That's not what I said. I don't want our first night to be about money." For a long moment, silence hung heavy between them. Finally, she laughed, loud, sharp, and unsettling. "Fine. Later. But don't keep me waiting, Derek. I didn't marry you to be left guessing." That night, he found the bedroom door locked from the inside. Monique claimed she had trouble sleeping and needed space, so Derek curled up alone on the couch. The air conditioner hummed, but the unease in his chest kept him awake. He thought about Marcus's warning, about his mother's worried eyes. He told himself it was just nerves. Still, something didn't feel right. The next morning, Derek tried to smooth things over. He suggested breakfast at a diner. Over pancakes and coffee, he reached across the table and smiled. Let's start fresh. No papers, no fights. Just us. Monique squeezed his hand, but her grip was firm, almost crushing. Of course, baby. Just us, she echoed. Yet the glint in her eyes made Derek's stomach twist. Back at the apartment, Monique insisted on cooking dinner for him that evening. She ordered groceries, prepared a feast, macaroni and cheese, fried catfish, collard greens. The aroma filled the small apartment, but Derek noticed the wine she poured for him tasted unusually bitter. Different brand? He asked, swirling the glass. Don't worry about it, she said quickly, a little too quickly. Just drink. Relax. Derek set the glass down, unease creeping higher. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Marcus. You good? The text read. Derek stared at the screen, his thumb hovering. After a pause, he typed, She's different. Controlling. I don't know, man. Maybe I rushed this. He hit send, then shoved the phone back into his pocket before Monique noticed. That night, the neighbors heard them argue. Their voices carried through the thin walls of the apartment complex. I won't sign anything I don't understand. Derek shouted. You think you can just leave me? Monique's voice roared, sharp with fury. After everything? I won't let you walk away. I won't. A door slammed. Furniture scraped against the floor. Then silence. The following morning, the second full day of their marriage, Derek looked worn. He called his mother, his voice low. Mama, he said, I don't know if I made a mistake. Her voice trembled on the other end. Son, you come home. You don't owe anybody anything. He nodded, though she couldn't see him. I'll think about it. But he never got the chance. That evening, neighbors reported the sound of muffled crying and then quiet. Hours later, at around 6 in the morning, Monique dialed 911, her voice frantic. My husband, he's not breathing. Please, please send someone. When paramedics arrived, they found Derek sprawled across the sofa, his eyes open but lifeless. Beside him sat the empty wine glass. On the floor was a pill bottle, its cap rolling in a slow circle. Monique knelt beside the body, rocking back and forth, wailing. He did this to himself. He took too much. I couldn't stop him. But even in those first chaotic minutes, something about her cries sounded off, too practiced, too loud, as though she was playing a role she'd already rehearsed. The marriage had lasted only 48 hours. The honeymoon was over before it had even begun. The sirens broke the quiet dawn, red and blue lights reflecting off the windows of the modest Florida apartment complex. Neighbors peered through blinds and cracked open doors as paramedics rushed up the narrow stairwell, guided by Monique's frantic sobs echoing down the hall. Inside, the living room smelled of stale wine and heavy food. Derek's body lay stretched across the sofa, his skin already paling, his chest still. The empty wine glass sat abandoned on the coffee table, a pill bottle tipped on its side beside it. Monique threw herself onto the floor, clutching her chest, her cries sharp and theatrical. He wouldn't listen. He just kept drinking. He took the pills. I couldn't stop him, she wailed, rocking back and forth. One of the paramedics, a seasoned man with gray at his temples, exchanged a quick glance with his partner. Something felt off. He checked for vitals, but it was far too late. Turning to the officer who had just arrived, he muttered, He's gone. Been gone for a while. Officer Lisa Hargrove crouched near the sofa, her eyes scanning the scene. No overturned tables, no broken glass, no sign of a violent struggle. But there was something strange. The bedroom door was locked tight from the outside. She bent down, pulled at the knob, then glanced back at Monique. Why is this locked? She asked. Monique froze, her sobbing stalling for half a second before she replied. I don't know. Derek sometimes locked doors when he was upset. I didn't ask. Lisa's brow furrowed. She'd heard a lot of lies in her years on the force, but that one was clumsy. Still, she said nothing, jotting down notes while paramedics prepared to move the body. Word of Derek's death spread quickly. Marcus arrived within the hour, his face pale with disbelief. He pushed past officers until one stopped him at the door. That's my best friend, Marcus insisted, his voice breaking. You can't tell me he's gone. When he finally saw Derek's body, covered now by a sheet, his fists clenched. He turned to Monique, who sat in a corner, dabbing her eyes with a crumpled tissue. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice sharp as glass. Monique shot back instantly, her voice rising. "Don't you dare. He was my husband. He did this to himself. You weren't here. You don't know." Marcus stepped closer, fury etched across his face, but Officer Hargrove intervened, holding him back. "Sir, not here. We need to conduct an investigation." Later that morning, the medical examiner's van carried Derek's body away. Monique collapsed against the doorway, wailing so loudly that neighbors shook their heads. Some whispered among themselves. "She sounds like she's acting," one woman muttered. Another nodded. "You hear them yelling last night?" Something wasn't right. Back at the precinct, the first reports rolled in. The paramedics noted the unusual calm between Monique's bursts of screaming. Officer Hargrove filed her observation about the locked bedroom door. And then came the detail that turned everything: the pill bottle. It was prescribed under Monique's name. When detectives confronted her about it, she insisted, "I take them for anxiety. Derek must have stolen them when I wasn't looking." Detective Raymond Clark studied her carefully. "So he took enough pills to stop his heart, and you didn't notice?" Tears welled up in Monique's eyes, but her voice shook with a defensive edge. "He was depressed. He told me he wanted to escape. I begged him not to, but he wouldn't listen." Clark leaned back in his chair. Something about her tone gnawed at him. He'd interviewed grieving spouses before. The pain was usually raw, uneven, unpolished. Monique's version felt rehearsed, her emotions turned up like the volume knob on a radio. By evening, an autopsy was ordered. Toxicology reports would take days, but the examiner had already made a preliminary note. Derek's bloodstream carried a dangerously high dose of benzodiazepines, far more than could be written off as an accident. The official cause of death was still pending, but for the detectives, a new possibility loomed larger by the hour. This wasn't a suicide. It was something far darker. Detectives worked the case from the first morning as if every second counted. Derek's body had barely cooled in the morgue before questions piled up faster than answers. Why had he died so suddenly, so violently, only 2 days after saying, "I do"? Why did Monique's story feel stitched together with trembling hands? Detective Raymond Clark and his partner, Officer Lisa Hargrove, began with the apartment. They photographed every corner: the half-eaten plates of food, the empty wine glass, the pill bottle that bore Monique's name. Lisa ran her gloved fingers over the bedroom doorknob again, shaking her head. "Locked from the outside," she murmured. He wasn't going in there without her letting him out. Clark crouched by the sofa, studying the scene. No vomit, no signs he tried to fight back. Whatever killed him, he didn't see it coming. By midday, they knocked on neighbors' doors. An older woman from across the hall recalled the shouting the night before. "I heard her voice, angry, screaming. She said something like, 'You'll regret it if you walk out on me.' Then it got quiet." Another neighbor nodded, saying he heard a man's voice, Derek's, pleading, "I can't sign anything else. Just stop." These testimonies painted a picture of a marriage already crumbling under pressure, less than 48 hours old. That afternoon, Clark and Hargrove sat down with Monique in the precinct's interview room. She wore black leggings and a loose shirt, her eyes swollen from crying, or perhaps from trying to look like she had been. A half-empty water bottle sat untouched in front of her. "We're sorry for your loss," Clark began, his voice steady. "But we need to understand exactly what happened the night Derek died. Can you walk us through it?" She took a deep breath, letting tears slip down her cheeks. "He was drinking wine. He was upset. He took the pills when I wasn't looking. By the time I noticed, it was too late." Lisa leaned forward, her tone firm but calm. "Those pills were prescribed to you. The dosage found in his body was extremely high. That doesn't happen by accident." Monique snapped her head up, her voice rising. "Are you saying I killed my husband? I loved him. I married him because I wanted forever." "Forever lasted 48 hours, Clark said quietly, watching her flinch. Her breathing grew heavier, her chest rising and falling as though she were holding back anger. Then, just as quickly, she softened her tone, pressing a tissue to her face. "He was my world. I didn't want this." When the detectives stepped out of the room, Clark whispered to Lisa, "She's flipping her emotions like a switch. That's not grief, that's performance." Meanwhile, the autopsy began. The medical examiner's initial findings were damning. Derek's stomach contained traces of wine laced with crushed pills. There were no signs he'd tried to swallow them whole on his own. Instead, the powder had been mixed into his drink. The dosage was lethal, administered over time, suggesting deliberate intent. Toxicology confirmed it. Derek had ingested enough benzodiazepines to knock out 3 grown men. His death wasn't an accident. It wasn't a suicide. Someone had put those pills in his glass. Detectives pulled Derek's phone records next. The last text he sent was to Marcus. "She's different. Controlling. Maybe I rushed this." The timestamp was less than 12 hours before his death. Marcus came back to the station to give a full statement. He leaned forward, his hands balled into fists as he recounted his final conversations with his best friend. "He told me she was pushing him, locking him out of the bedroom, making him sign papers. He wasn't happy. He was scared." Clark asked, "Did he say why she wanted him to sign papers?" Marcus nodded grimly. "Money. Assets. He said she kept bringing up his car, his savings account, even his insurance policy. She wanted everything under her name, fast." Detectives traced Monique's financial history and uncovered a storm of debt. Credit card balances maxed out, payday loans unpaid, and threatening letters from collection agencies. This marriage had been less about love and more about survival for Monique. Derek's steady income and modest assets had been her ticket out of financial ruin. When detectives confronted her with these findings, Monique's mask began to crack. "So what if I had bills? Who doesn't? That doesn't mean I wanted him dead," she barked. "But it does mean you had motive," Clark said, sliding the papers across the table. "You needed money, you needed security." Derek wasn't ready to hand it all over. And now, conveniently, he's gone. Monique's eyes darted from the documents to the detectives, her hands trembling as she clutched the tissue tighter. For a moment, the room fell silent except for the hum of the overhead light. Finally, she whispered, "He promised me forever. He said he wouldn't leave. But then he changed his mind. I couldn't let him walk away." Lisa leaned closer. "What did you do, Monique?" Tears spilled faster now, her words tumbling out between sobs. "I just wanted him to calm down. I crushed some pills into his wine so he would relax, so he wouldn't think about leaving. I didn't mean to kill him. I didn't." The confession hung heavy in the air. Not a cold-blooded plan, she claimed, but an act born of desperation and fear. Yet the result was the same. Derek was dead. Clark folded his notebook shut, his voice flat. "Intentional or not, you gave him the dose. You ended his life." Monique buried her face in her hands, rocking back and forth. "I loved him," she sobbed. But love, the detectives knew, had nothing to do with it. What they saw was obsession, control, and desperation disguised as devotion. And with the evidence in hand, they had what they needed to move forward. The case was no longer about a grieving widow. It was about a woman who had turned marriage vows into a weapon and who now faced the consequences of crossing the line between love and possession. The interrogation room felt smaller with every passing hour. Monique sat hunched at the metal table, her shoulders heavy, her eyes rimmed red. She had already admitted to slipping pills into Derek's wine, but detectives knew there was more. Her story didn't explain the locked bedroom door, the arguments, or the neighbor's testimony. Detective Clark re-entered the room, carrying a slim folder. He set it down with deliberate calm, his eyes never leaving hers. "We need you to hear something," he said. He pressed a button on a small recorder, and a grainy phone conversation crackled through the speaker. It was Monique's voice, unmistakable, speaking with her sister 2 days before the wedding. "If he walks out on me, I'll have nothing. I can't let that happen. I'll do whatever it takes to keep him." Monique's face blanched. She shifted in her chair, her hands fidgeting with the tissue she'd shredded into pieces. "That doesn't mean anything," she snapped. "I was upset. People say things when they're upset." Clark leaned forward, his voice low and firm. "You weren't just upset, Monique. You were planning. You knew Derek was second-guessing, and you decided you weren't going to let him go. This wasn't an accident. It was a choice." Tears welled in her eyes, but there was a flash of anger too. "You don't understand. Men always leave. They promise forever, then they walk away. Derek was different. He said he would stay. I couldn't let him take that away from me." Officer Hargrove stepped in. "So you decided to take his choice away instead?" Monique's breathing grew ragged. She pressed both palms to her face, her voice muffled. "I just wanted him to be still, to stop talking about leaving. I thought if I gave him enough, he'd calm down." He'd see that I loved him. But you didn't just give him enough to calm down, Clark said, sliding the toxicology report across the table. You gave him enough to stop his heart. The silence that followed was suffocating. Monique's sobs echoed off the walls, her body rocking in the chair as though she were trying to cradle herself. Her words came out in broken fragments. I didn't mean for him to die. I just wanted him to need me. Clark let the silence stretch before he spoke again. Monique, Derek wasn't your prisoner. He was a man who trusted you, who wanted love. And you turned that trust into his death sentence. Her eyes shot up, wide and wild. Don't say that. I loved him. I did everything for him. If he had just signed the papers, if he had just listened, none of this would have happened. Lisa's voice cut sharp as a knife. Listen to yourself. You're not talking about love. You're talking about control. About ownership. Love doesn't come with contracts and ultimatums. Love doesn't end with a man dead on his sofa. Monique slammed her hands onto the table, the tissue scraps scattering like snow. You think I wanted this? You think I planned to be here, sitting in this room, losing everything? He was supposed to stay. He promised me. Her voice cracked, breaking into sobs again. The walls of denial were crumbling, piece by piece. Clark spoke quietly now, almost with pity. He promised forever, but you only gave him 48 hours. That was your choice, and now you're going to live with it. Monique collapsed forward, her forehead pressing against the cold metal table. Between sobs, the truth spilled out in full. She admitted she had argued with Derek late that night. She admitted she had locked the bedroom door to keep him from leaving. She admitted she crushed pill after pill, mixing it into his glass until he could barely keep his eyes open. I thought he would just sleep, she whispered hoarsely. I thought he would wake up and realize he had no one but me. The detectives let the confession settle. It wasn't just a crime of passion. It was desperation, obsession, and fear twisted into something lethal. By the time Monique was escorted from the interrogation room, her tears had dried into streaks across her face. Her head hung low, her hands cuffed at her sides. In the hallway, Marcus stood silently, watching her pass. His eyes burned with grief and fury. You took him from us, he said, his voice low but steady. You took the best man I knew, and for what? So you wouldn't be alone. Monique didn't answer. She couldn't. As the detectives filed the paperwork for her arrest, Clark paused by the window, looking out at the Florida sun rising over the parking lot. 48 hours, he murmured. That's all it took for forever to turn into nothing. The case against Monique Carter was now undeniable. What remained was for a courtroom to hear the story and decide her fate. The trial drew crowds from the first day. Reporters lined the courthouse steps, cameras flashing as Monique Carter was led inside in an orange jumpsuit, her once proud head bowed. The case had already made headlines across Florida. Groom dead after 48 hours of marriage. Wife accused. It was a story people couldn't stop talking about. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Derek's family filled the front rows, his mother clutching a handkerchief, Marcus sitting stiff and unblinking, his grief sharpened into anger. On the opposite side, Monique's relatives sat quietly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. When the bailiff called the court to order, Judge Alan Monroe entered, his black robe swaying as he took his seat. The room fell silent. The prosecution began with a simple but devastating narrative. Monique had lured Derek into a rushed marriage, pressured him for financial gain, and when he resisted, she poisoned him with her own prescription medication. Assistant District Attorney Carla Bennett stood before the jury, her voice strong and measured. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about a tragic accident. It is about control. It is about a woman who decided that if she could not keep her husband by love, she would keep him by force. And in doing so, she took his life. She laid out the evidence piece by piece, the toxicology report, the neighbor's testimony, the phone call recording where Monique said she couldn't let Derek walk away. Each detail was another nail in the coffin of Monique's defense. The defense attorney, James Rollins, painted a very different picture. He argued that Monique was a troubled woman, yes, but not a killer. She acted out of fear, not malice, Rollins insisted. She crushed those pills because she was desperate to hold on to a man she believed was her last chance at love. This was not murder. It was a mistake, a tragic accident born from emotional turmoil. When Monique took the stand, the courtroom leaned forward. Dressed in a plain black dress provided by her attorneys, She looked smaller than she had in the mugshot plastered across the news. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I loved Derek," she said, clutching a tissue. "He was kind to me when nobody else was. I was afraid he would leave, like everyone else had before. I didn't mean to hurt him. I just wanted him to stay." Carla Bennett's cross-examination cut through the tears. "You say you loved him, Mrs. Carter. But love doesn't mean locking a man out of his own bedroom. Love doesn't mean crushing handfuls of pills into his drink. Love doesn't mean taking away his life." Monique shook her head violently, sobbing. "You don't understand what it's like to be left, to be abandoned again and again. I couldn't take it anymore." "Perhaps not," Carla replied coolly. "But what we do understand is choice. You chose to put those pills in his glass. You chose to lock that door. And because of your choices, Derek Hayes is gone forever." The jury listened, stone-faced, as both sides made their final pleas. After hours of deliberation, they returned with their decision. The courtroom hushed as the foreman stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Monique Carter, guilty of second-degree murder." Gasps rippled through the room. Derek's mother clutched Marcus's hand, tears spilling down her face. Marcus closed his eyes, whispering, "Justice, at last." Monique let out a wail, her body shaking as the bailiff stepped forward to take her into custody. "I loved him," she screamed. "I didn't mean to kill him. He was supposed to stay." Judge Monroe's gavel struck sharply. "Order in the court. The defendant will serve 20 years to life in the Florida Department of Corrections." As she was led away, her cries echoed down the corridor, haunting but hollow. For Derek's family, the verdict brought little comfort. No sentence could bring back the man who had believed he'd found love, only to lose his life 2 days later. But for the community, the case stood as a chilling reminder. Vows spoken in haste, secrets left in shadows, and love twisted by fear can all end in tragedy. The courthouse emptied slowly after the verdict, but the weight of what had transpired lingered heavy in the air. Outside on the steps, the Florida sun blazed bright, almost mocking the grief that clung to Derek's loved ones. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, cameras snapping, but his mother turned her face away, clutching Marcus's arm for support. "He was supposed to be safe," she whispered through her tears. "He just wanted to be loved." Marcus's jaw tightened, his voice breaking as he answered. And she took advantage of that. She used his heart against him. In the weeks that followed, the story of Derek Hayes spread far beyond his neighborhood. Local news anchors recounted the whirlwind marriage that ended in death. Talk shows debated whether Monique was a manipulative predator or a broken woman consumed by her own fears. Online forums lit up with strangers arguing about love, desperation, and control. Everyone seemed to have an opinion, but for those who truly knew Derek, the case was not a headline. It was an open wound. At Derek's funeral, friends and family filled the small church. The choir hummed softly as his casket, draped in white lilies, was carried down the aisle. Marcus delivered the eulogy, his voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "Derek believed in love more than anyone I've ever known," he said. "He believed in second chances, in giving people the benefit of the doubt. That faith was his greatest gift, and, in the end, his downfall. But I won't remember him for